I think it reached the stage where the tension got so taut to the point we kind of felt a need lah. We need to talk about this. Otherwise, this whole thing is going down. So we did lor.
Hello and welcome to the Connect to Marriage podcast. I am Delia and I am your host for this episode. In each episode of the Connect to podcast, we'll be tackling questions that couples ask about marriage, communication and conflict, and so much more. We hope you'll keep tuning in to learn with us as you grow closer, deeper and stronger in your marriage. Marriages are under fire. In our 2021 Celebrate Marriage quiz, the married couples we surveyed clocked an average score of 11.29 against a match score of 21. Any score below 13.5 indicates a higher risk of marital distress. Recent divorce statistics also show that the highest proportion of breakups came between the 5th and the 10th year of marriage. Could one of the reasons for this be the stresses that come during important transitions of life, such as parenthood or midlife career change? Today, we have Stephen and Charissa in the studio with us. They've been married for 15 years and are parents to 3 children. Another interesting fact is that they are both freelancers, so they live and work together almost 24/7. They'll be sharing tips on how they've learned to communicate through the different seasons and challenges that life brings to them. Stephen and Charissa, welcome to the Connect to podcast.
Hello.
Hi. Now, would you share with us and introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hi, I'm Charissa, wife to Stephen and proud mummy to 3 kids. They are 12, 10 and 6 this year. Well, I've been self-employed pretty much the whole of my life with maybe short employment stints. And I realized what has maybe guided my career path so far has always been my family. So I enjoy the freedom that I get from being self-employed as an MC on stage doing events. And it allows me to spend more time and see the kids grow up.
For myself, my background is actually quite diverse lah. So I've done things from being a junior designer to a marketer to a car sales guy, full circle, running a business, going back to employment and eventually ending up as a freelancer for the past maybe 4 or 5 years. I focus mostly on the creative side of things now, touching a little bit about brand strategy, brand design, general design support, and also currently part-time tutor at one of the polytechnics in Singapore.
Wonderful. I mean, it is very clear that the both of you have alignment in your life goals. You have made choices in your career path that have enabled you to prioritize what really matters to you. At the same time, we recognize that this path less taken and this unique arrangement that you have taken would also bring about its own set of challenges, and probably sacrifices. So could you share with us a little bit more, about the tensions or in the areas of having to balance your work and family responsibilities in this aspect?
That's a good question because we were not always the way we were in terms of employment status. Mm-hmm. So there was this story that we had where I would be the flexible one, self-employed, very uncertain about cash flow, and he would be the stable one. So he was usually in employment pretty much up till we had our second kid. So that was even 2017, for example. So it was a very difficult leap for us to come to this point where he became self-employed. It came with a lot of quarrels, stresses like, are you sure we're going to be able to sustain this family with uncertain cash flow? And then what will he do with his extra time? So instead of giving freedom, it actually caused a lot of stress initially for Steve as he transit into our current status.
Looking back, I think it was really a difficult leap for me because like Charissa said, I more or less am the so-called stable one. I mean, in a family unit, like husband and wife, only one can YOLO lah. That kind of dynamic, right? It's only now that I understand that it's quite a misconception. That actually 2 people can YOLO, but we just got to manage the risk. So I think the tough part for us was to really come to terms of this uncertainty and whether are we able to tank it or not if things don't go so well. So we kind of have a lot of discussion and quarrels about it lah. Mostly with myself actually, because she's actually supportive. So it's my own barriers that I need to cross. That's what you want to say, right?
No, I want to jump in at this point to say like a very basic thing that we felt the tension, it was a tremendous amount of tension for years, was the car. we used to have 2 cars, and then he could like zoom off to his workplace, do his corporate life thing, right? And then I would be happy doing my thing, flexible, go marketing lah, do a job or 2, voiceovers, events. So I really enjoyed the freedom. And then suddenly we had to sell that car because now we have to readjust our finances and resources. It became 1 car. So the big tension for a long time was, I'm paying for the car, or he's paying for the car. Why do you get to drive it all the time? And especially if I get into an accident, like a little traffic thing, and I scuff the car, he'd be like, I'm going to transfer the whole car to you because, you've just bought my NCD, is it?
Yeah,
no claims discount. So then I'm like, well, spoiled his clean driving record. So because things were starting to get enmeshed together so much more, it was as basic as finding who gets the car, how much time do you get with the car.
I mean, that's like an analogy lah. If you can take the car as a metaphor to maybe the dynamics that's happening, it's kind of like, I used to have like, that's my private space, my own personal space. And then now we have to kind of share that space. And because of this sharing, I get collateral damage in some way, right? And I become very protective of what used to be entirely my own. It felt a little bit like that. Maybe it might be a bit abstract for the audience to understand. But it was a period of really push and pull to try to come to terms that this is the way it is, I guess.
I think it's interesting because, just now, Steve, you mentioned that it's like in case of your navigating your transitions and wanting to, in a sense, both wanting to YOLO, or rather choosing the path that gives you the freedom or the flexibility to prioritize different parts of your life. But at the same time, because of that, there were trade-offs.
Yes.
And that trade-offs actually requires you to play team even more.
Yes.
On the contrary, when we think that, if we live our own lives separately and in parallel, actually we would have the resources to actually have our own things. But now we need to merge and combine and consolidate such that, hey, let's make this happen together such that you win and you win, both win.
Yeah.
Yes.
At different junctures in different ways.
Yeah.
And that's what marriage is, right? Because we can very well say that we are content living our own parallel lives, but what has just happened through that tension, frustration, arguments was a coming together of both of you and saying, hey, I'm supportive of you making this choice of transiting, Steve, but at the same time, this requires both of us to say, hey, let's consolidate and let's decide now how we're going to make this work for our whole family. So, wow, I mean, I can't imagine how difficult those periods of time could have felt to feel at the start that loss of what I own or what I think belongs to me to now saying, hey, this is ours.
Yeah.
And this is what we want to build for our family.
Actually, this whole process took, I would say, years. Even up to today, it's still happening. We're still changing and maybe adapting to each other's changes lah. Now that both have made the decision to maybe come together instead of both running our own lives as married couples, it feels a little bit like moving out to stay on your own. It feels a bit like that. Let's say if both of us were individual working parents, you run your life, I run my life, and then we regroup at home. That's maybe what it is for a lot of couples. Yeah, but for us, because of the way we are, I think it is enmeshed together in a much more complex way. It's actually harder to be enmeshed together in such a complicated way rather than each of us living our separate lives. Maybe that's where the lesson is as well lah.
Interesting. Any thoughts, Charissa, as you hear him reflect?
The early years of marriage are filled with unique challenges and opportunities for growth. What happens after saying I do? At the Connect to Just Married workshop, you will gain practical tools to work through differences and conflicts and learn ways to keep the romance alive. If you have been married for 5 years or less, this workshop is for you. Get more information at www.family.org.sg/C2JustMarried.
I would say that when we were not healthy, there was enmeshment. But now that we are healthier, it becomes more of a consolidation. So
Integration.
integration. We're able to integrate parts of ourselves. Like last time, it was always like a tension between, well, this is what I want, this is what we need. So it's the I and the we. And if I found myself needing to always take care of you and the family, it's like always the we takes precedence. And then I forget about the I, which is myself. And I think that did brew into quite a bit of resentment and tension over, we don't even know what we're quarreling about sometimes. There's just so much tension because I had felt that I was giving up a lot of myself for family needs.
A lot of personal unmet needs.
Yeah, and the best part was he also felt the same way, you know, right? That you're giving out a lot for this family in that sense. So it was not a good place to be in.
Right. Thank you for sharing, so vulnerably about that difficult times that y'all were in. And I just wonder if you could just share what helped you to talk about these things and how do you communicate these unmet needs that you started to observe in yourselves?
I think it reached a stage where the tension got so taut to the point we kind of felt a need lah. We need to talk about this. Otherwise, this whole thing is going down. So we did. So I guess we changed the way we talk about things. Internally also remove a lot of assumptions, put it on the table first and clear those assumptions up and have a different conversation about it lah. So we used to have this thing, but it has evolved lah. We used to have this thing called Heavy Topics Thursdays.
He gave the name, he titled it.
Why Thursdays though?
Yeah, I don't know why Thursdays, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, there's a reason why Thursdays. Because Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is usually the sian part of the week, right? And then Wednesday is like the midweek. Thursday, it's kind of like, it's going to be Friday soon. Friday, you reserve for Fridays, right? It's very sacred one. That one cannot touch. So it's Thursdays. Right? But then now it has evolved to almost an everyday thing. Like in this Heavy Topics Thursday nights, all the crap comes out. We have to talk about it. I dread it, to be honest. So these could be things that happen in the week, what she's thinking, what I'm thinking, what challenges are we facing with our kids, our own disagreements, our own perspective on certain issues, trash it out. Or sometimes it takes a couple of Thursdays to, I won't say resolve it, but to reach some kind of consensus or acceptance to the matter.
I have a new way of managing information now that with some experience of Heavy Thursdays and my partner's capacity. So like Steve, Steve is able to now say like, hey, this is too much. It's like a bit heavy. I want to eat my KFC and just Netflix, and he's able to say that and be like, okay lah, let's do it lah. So then I'm also able to drop it. So in the past, I had took that quite personally and felt that he didn't want to also put in the effort to listen about important things that were happening. So we started to have these very different roles where I would take on a lot of the planning and the worrying and all of that. And then he would be like, you always come to me with problems. Can you come to me with some joy and something light and talk to me about some,
some stupid, funny things.
Fun, stupid things or, silly things. So I thought, yeah, it shouldn't be that way, right? Because we are both in it together. Yeah, we're both building this family together. So speaking of information, I realized that not everybody can take a huge amount of information at one go. So in terms of how I started to share is that we have a shared calendar. So then when we put information in there like, oh, my son has this, my daughter has this, teacher needs to talk to us about that, he's able to see at his own pace and absorb that information. Then at the end of the week, we'll be like, so how's your day? And then naturally he will then also come round up to the things that he saw in the family calendar and say, oh yeah, I saw this, I was thinking about that. And so we naturally engage in the conversation willingly. Yeah, as two parties.
So it becomes like project management. So we are actually having a WIP meeting.
For what WIP? For the benefit of our listeners?
Work in progress.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of like you are in the midst of a project, right? And then we kind of regroup to update each other. What's the status? Which milestones have we cleared? What is behind? What is in front? Is there any risk to manage, etc.? Things like that.
So like to check in with one another and see how you're going with it.
Yeah. Because I think somehow, like what she said, we kind of adapted to different ways or techniques we want to learn about the information. Sometimes I'm not ready for it, and then she comes like this nuclear bomb, and then I just get totally wiped out, right? Then that's no good, right? So she's found a way around that, maybe through her own observation.
Communication styles. So I can be quite intense. I
Yeah.
just want to put everything on the table.
Yeah.
And he's like, wow, the table is so full. I just want to like go to sit another table.
Yeah, yeah.
And then he doesn't even want to discuss. Yeah.
Correct. I'm glad she knows that she's very intense lah, because she is really very intense.
Well, I guess you might have found that very attractive about her as well.
That's why we've been married for so long.
I mean, the truth is yes and no lah. Yes and no. So with this understanding of maybe realization of the way we are, also understanding that it's not something to change, right? It's just something we need to adapt with. It's kind of like a co-worker or a very close colleague that you're working with on a project. That kind of feeling.
So I think it's interesting, right? Because we can transfer some of these so-called skills from the workplace into how we can actually relate to one another in the home. I mean, this, after all, still a husband and wife relationship, it's a marriage, and there will still be that dynamics where it's romance, it's affection, it's not just function, it's not just let's do this task, get this ground covered. So I just wanted to find out, how then do you navigate a space, right? Like, okay, we have not fully dealt with this aspect. It was too much for us to deal today. We're still going to go on. How do you keep that intimacy and connection going if something was not fully addressed yet?
I think it's more about accepting the position of where the thing is, right? And be able to maybe to segregate, compartmentalize. It's easier said than done, of course. We are still learning that even up to this day. For me, I look at it this way. There's certain paradoxes that exist in my head that help me learn certain things about working together with her, right? Is that I find it paradoxical when a person spends more time with a colleague at work with very, very good dynamics, but doesn't do the same at home. That feels somewhat wrong foundationally, right? So I observed that with myself and I felt that I needed to change. It's the same thing with raising children. When I am at work, I wish that I can go home and be with my kid. But then when I'm at home with my kid, I wish I can go back to work. It's that paradox, that awareness that made me reframe the whole situation and be able to segment what is a task, what is hard and what is head. Can I say that?
I think I attribute this, I always say work is much easier, so professional. You just get the job done and that you get remunerated, you get appreciated. Everything is just so clear.
Not true.
It's so clear professionally. That's how I personally feel. But when I go home, it's like all these are not clear. Where's my remuneration? Nobody comes up to me saying, good job, well done, wow, you're best wife, best mom. None of that. And then the type of relationships, you can be very nice to your colleague, which is your husband or your kids, but then, they don't reciprocate or things like that. And there's no appraisal, nothing. So it feels very, I feel at home, you have to find your sense of satisfaction in the time together. You also have to decide on your intention why, because this is really your work family for life kind of thing, you're doing life together. So it's quite important to figure this part out. I feel at home, from my mom's perspective, right, I also feel where's my identity? In work, I'm maybe manager, I'm so and so, quite important, and recognize, and people listen. But when I go home, nobody listens. It's hello, do I need to wear a title down here, CEO or something, So I feel I
take MC first.
Just being able to define those for yourself first, I think is quite an important start, right? Who are you? Who do you want to be at home? What sort of life and satisfaction do you get from being with your family? I feel I got that clear. I was then able to decide how I want to approach my time with my husband, or which battles do I want to fight at home also.
That's so good. And I truly appreciate how humble the both of you have been in your sharing, because some of the things that you're saying are things that people probably think about in their moments of frustration and discouragement. Yet what you have articulated actually points back to grounding on what matters right from the start. Even as we hear the honest reflections of Steve, it's really just recognizing that the relationships matter more than what we can accomplish in terms of the task, right? While these things may still need to be taken care of, but at the end of the day, even as Charissa reflected earlier on, that actually family does matter to her, and that's why she actually decided to work her life around that as that centerpiece for herself. Yeah, and thank you as well for reflecting about the identity portion, about how it's important not to allow the situation, because the day-to-day can be quite chaotic, and sometimes it does feel thankless, in those mundane moments, but recognizing that your identity is what would ground you and not so much just the celebrations or the affirmations only.
I think for her personality, she has personal pursuits. It took some time for me to really recognize that and to understand it and to give her the space to go and run her personal pursuits. That reinforces her own being outside being a mother or
Wife.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, more than a housewife.
Yeah.
This is a question that we received from an audience, is that I'm thinking of scaling down my work and switching to a part-time arrangement to take care of my family, but I'm worried my husband will think it's too impractical for us to scale down to manage our finances. How should I broach the topic with him?
After I crashed and burned in many situations, I kind of reached a stage where I felt that I needed to take a step back to maybe reevaluate or recenter myself, right? And maybe take on more lighter supporting role type of work. I think that was what actually led me to where I currently am. So I'm lucky enough to say that she is very supportive of my decision. Actually, from the start, she was telling me, go and work for yourself. Why do you need to keep thinking that being employed is the only way to go? Yeah, because that's the way I'm used to. I give myself the pressure of breaching this topic because I feel very responsible as the man of the house, right? And to almost put this vulnerability out on the table, it feels like I'm putting my ego at the table, right? Which I am. So that was a tough thing for me to do. But she is very open to the idea and I would say overly supportive, to the point where I feel that she is not assessing it carefully. That kind of situation. But to answer the question, how to broach it, I think timing is important, and also try to formulate some kind of scenarios that could happen if that route was taken. Yeah, basically planning for outcomes and then use that planning as the point of discussion to see what possibilities can open up or whether is it even a decision that needs to be made or not.
Jumping in on that, I think this conversation doesn't need to be taken all in one sitting. It can be done in smaller bites. But I think the important starting point is right time, right place. So it's important that your husband or the spouse that you're talking to is in the right headspace, the right space to have this conversation. I think that's a basic responsibility that we can do as a speaker. Like, don't choose a time when the kids are running around, he's just come back from work, he's super stressed and say, hey, I gotta tell you something.
Sure, die one.
Sure explode one. Sure just cannot be able to listen. So I think that is a starting point. To be sensitive to your partner's requirements, right? To be able to listen to you. And then I guess as the person that's bringing it to the table, it's good to then be clear, right? Have a conversation with yourself. And why is this important to you? I think it's important to bring that to your partner and let them know how this decision impacts you, and perhaps to listen, to then go with curiosity and say, what do you think? How do you feel? And allow that to come up without saying like, oh, but trying to fix your partner's discomfort. So yeah, being curious and being ready to listen to what they want to say back to you after they listen.
Right.
So just based on that response, right, you can almost see that Charissa is very very hard person. I'm maybe in this case a bit more head person. Maybe to add on to that, timing, right place, right time kind of situation, also be realistic about the current position of the family. Whether like in time-wise, financial-wise, is it wise to do it or not? Yeah, I think that really sets the boundaries of that conversation. Yeah, I think that will help a lot. Because in some cases where it is actually you have lots of runway, there's a lot of possibilities, right? Then I would say should have that conversations worth having. Yeah, but if the situation is unstable already, don't make it more unstable. Yeah,
and I think to expound on that, it's also about choosing the right time, right place in having a conversation is one thing. Choosing the right time to even implement on the action is also another, right? So it may not be a yes now, but it could be a let's wait and see, maybe a few months down the road or maybe a year later or more, and let's wait this so that we can prepare or show up what we need to get ready for that. And that is not a no. That could just be like a wait, and that's our next step that we're going to work on together. right? Yeah, and I think that is something that I really appreciate how you all have framed this. Is really about recognizing that decisions or conversations are not had in, we don't have it in just one single sitting. It's also just being able to hold that seemingly discomfort, but actually it sometimes helps us, right? Give us a space to just process, manage our emotions as well, and then come back together and talk about it again when we are a bit more ready to go deeper on that matter. Yeah, so I really want to thank you, Steve and Charissa, for sharing with us, your personal experiences and how you've persevered in keeping this relationship strong despite the challenges or the seasons that you've gone through together. I wish you all the best as well, because I know we are looking forward to your eldest going to secondary school and your youngest going primary school next year.
Yep.
And maybe next time around we can hear more about your experience having gone through that transition, because I believe that is something that is actually an opportunity for growth for your family as well. In each episode, we actually end off with our couples encouraging you to share with one another what you have learned. So if you're listening to this with your spouse, do share with your spouse what's one thing that you've picked up today in terms of being able to communicate better with one another, especially on the hard topics. And for those of you who are looking to tie the knot very soon, do check out our Connect to Marriage Preparation Workshop coming up in January 2025. For more details, go to www.family.org.sg/C2MarriagePrep. So we hope that you have found today's episode helpful, and don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, or share this podcast with a friend who might also benefit from it. Thank you for tuning in, and remember to take care of yourself and your spouse.